Salutations! Welcome to Learning the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and today I'll tell you about all the books I read in the month of December. I'm going to try and speak as quickly as possible in this video because I read 17 book-ish pieces of text. And when I say that, I mean that I only actually read 11 novels, and the rest of them were either novellas, short stories, or even a speech. But I do want to talk about each and every one, if however briefly, because I gotta keep up the trend. I made a wrap up for every single month in 2015, and who knows what'll happen in 2016. I mean, it's already the 7th or 8th or something, and I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'm going to try my hardest not to sound redundant in every single recent video I made, but I'm just going to give you the little lowdown of everything. I'm currently in Oxford, England from January to March of this year, and that is why I have this background. I'm still working with the lighting, still working with basically everything. My room, it's disheveled to be honest, but we're just going to deal with it for now, and I do have a really great filming location for natural light, but of course it's, 8 o'clock at night and I haven't filmed this video, and I need to film it and get to editing it as soon as possible. So again, we're just gonna grin and bear it for now, and I promise to have things figured out by maybe January's wrap up, maybe. Ish. The first book I read this month was Why Not Me by Mindy Kaling. If you didn't know, I read and loved Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me and Other Concerns in the year of 2014, and I just had to pick up her new book. Basically, it's another hilarious installment of Mindy's life, with her giving advice towards everyday things, and then of course not so everyday things considering her life is a bit unusual. And of course, I laughed out loud for basically the entire memoir. The next book I read was the first out of my Black Friday book outlet haul. This book particularly was 10 Tiny Breasts by K.A. Tucker, a new adult contemporary romance. I have an entire book talk. To be honest, I felt that it was way too much of a mishmash of all these other new adult novels I've read and could not hold a candle whatsoever to the Colleen Hoover books I have so much adored. I didn't feel strong enough for the characters, and I found a lot of improbabilities surrounding their circumstance, and that's the whole thing, is that new adult is nothing but unrealistic occurrences. But the really good new adult authors will make you believe that we destroy each other's lives, but let's date anyways and love each other regardless. I swear that is the plotline of every single new adult novel I have ever read. But at the same time, as always, new adult is very enjoyable for a quick read, and I had fun. Then I read Tilt by Ellen Hopkins with my best friend. Actually, from around half of the novel we were FaceTiming and we read page by page. It felt like something you would do out of contemporary romance, but we're best friends, and it was such a fun bonding experience regardless. I thought that this was definitely not the top of Ellen Hopkins' books I've ever read, but definitely not the lowest either. This book follows a whole community of characters. Some of them are related, some of them are friends, some of them are family, some of them are just jerks to each other. What I loved about this book was the entire scope that it gave us of this little town and everything going on. And as always, Ellen Hopkins gives us this view of basically the worst possibility for humans in this entire world times like 10. I cannot imagine how much time it takes for her to write these books and how she does it in the first place, because a lot of what she writes is focused on the structure, and I have no idea how many freaking revisions her entire drafts go through. The next novel I read this month was one that I audiobooked, and that was actually the best decision. I have a whole unlisted book review. It had so much potential with its premise, but it was first of all too short, and second of all, I didn't care quite enough and feel connected with the characters to feel bad with what was happening to them. Essentially, this follows a village where no one can hear. They are mining and they're stuck on top of this mountain, and the only way to actually get food and supplies so that they can't make themselves is by sending all their precious metals down a zip line, and then the zip line sending things back up. Once the people in Faye, the main character's village, start losing their sense of sight, then that's obviously when things go downhill, and she takes it upon herself to go down the mountain, something that no one has done in centuries, and find help. And the whole twist behind it is that suddenly she's able to hear. The next book was one that made it onto my top of 15 books of 2015, and that is Faking Normal by Courtney C. Stevens. I remember this as being one of the very first books I had ever heard about when I entered the blogosphere 2 years ago, and I just never got around to it. And my best friend picked it off my bookshelf and was like, hey, can I read this? And I was like, sure, because I'm not going to read it anytime soon. She came back the next day and she made me read it. I never would have gotten to it this quickly, and I never would have had the full impact and scope of everything this novel brings to the table. It follows a girl who has been raped and all the repercussions and sort of PTSD-like aftermath, as well as her family having taken in this boy named Bodhi who just lost his mother. And there's slow simmering romance that develops first from a really good, solid friendship, and the two of them are basically the only ones who understand each other, and they are absolutely 100% there for each other, even when they think that they aren't. The next book is one that I hauled during my What I Got for Christmas video, which was a completely just trolling title, and that was Walking with a Stranger by Ray Carson, and I listened primarily as an audiobook. First of all, let me just say that Ray Carson is one of my favorite young adult fantasy / magical realism authors. She has this way of making you not really know why you're enjoying a book, but you can't find a particular element of her writing that compels you to keep reading, but you do anyways, and once you've gotten to the end, she's painted this full color image of everything going on in a world that she has devised. She usually has a very strong, kick-ass main character, and this particular novel follows a girl named Lee who has disguised herself as a boy and is traveling with a wagon train across the country to California to participate in the gold rush, because she has a very special ability, which is to sense gold, and she has people such as her uncle who are after her because of it. The next book I read was one that I actually audiobooked, and that was The Adoration of Jenna Fox by Mary E. Pierce. I freaking love books that focus on bioethics and the whole idea of what it means to be human and the supposed humanity that doctors lack when they operate. This particular novel follows a girl who doesn't really know what's going on. She pretty much has a very fragile memory of what's happened in the past, and she wakes up to discover that she's not who she thinks she is, and her family is trying to keep her in this bubble of ignorance, and she's trying to fight it against it. And I can't really tell you what is so compelling about her story without giving it completely away. I actually tried to read the next book, The Fox Inheritance. I got around halfway through the audiobook and I just had to DNF it because there was none of the fascination I had that followed the first book, and it was following a different set of characters. I know obviously the characters would have met and their stories would have connected, but where I was when I DNF'd it, it didn't happen. And I would highly recommend Mary E. Pearson as a writer if you just want to think about what you're reading and really have something to chew on. Because I read Faking Normal by Courtney C. Stevens, I had to pick up her newer release, which came out in either October or November of 2015, and that is The Lies About Truth. It did not blow me away anywhere near the degree that Faking Normal did. I think that it's going to be really hard for her to top her debut, just because once you write a character that is so raw and put everything into them, I think it's really hard to just formulate another one and make them come alive in front of your readers. This particular novel is more of a ensemble cast, but still did focus on this one girl who has survived the aftermath of a tragic accident, which was actually her friend's fault. It's just about the four of them reconnecting and learning how to be in each other's presences without constantly apologizing. There are romantic feelings that have been exchanged between them and maybe aren't there anymore, and it's a great story of recovery and really just finding out that not all hope is lost after tragedy. Then I listened to the audiobook for The Rosie Project by Graham Simon. I have never had the situation where I audiobooked a book in one sitting, but I did that essentially with The Rosie Project. I just sat down and basically drained the battery of my phone by playing Two Dots, My Obsession, and listened. It is just as hilarious as everyone says. The characters are so quirky. You're just so addicted to the perspective that the main character brings. It is hinted towards that he actually has a form of Asperger's, which is why he's so obsessive with his behaviors and his routines. He likes lists, he likes orders, he likes things fitting in boxes, and he's doing this thing called the Wife Project, where he hands out to a bunch of women these surveys. If they answer them correctly, will constitute the perfect wife. Unfortunately, a woman called Rosie gets in the way of everything. She is nothing like his criteria, and he forms this bond with her, and he really doesn't know what it is, whether it's friendship or romantic attraction or anything else on any level, and now I know why everybody has been raving about it since its release. The next book I listened to was one that I really just wanted to DNF the entire time I was listening to it, and that was A Boy Meets Boy by David Levithan. I have heard so much about this book even before I joined the booktube and blogging community. It's very much seen as one of the trailblazers for LGBT and YA literature. David Levithan is basically seen as a spokesperson in general for the entire community. While I did see why there was so much hype surrounding it, the characters seemed just so unrealistic, and without trying to go off on stereotypes or be offensive in any way, the main character seemed so much like a girl in the way that he was so obsessive over his past boyfriends, his future potential boyfriend, and everything going on in his situation. Yes, it was great that he was so relaxed about his sexuality and was in this community where being gay was totally okay. I respect that so much as a reader, but at the same time, I like my stories with enticing qualities for me to read more, and I did not find that with Boy Meets Boy. The next book I read was the final Rainbow Rowell book for me to be caught up with everything that she has written except for Carry On, and that was Attachments, which is actually my least favorite book that she has published, mostly because I did not see what was so freaking hilarious and heartwarming and funny about this story. Like, yes, it's about this guy who is lost, has no idea what he's doing with his life, which is the premise for many novels, I might add, and he just creepily starts reading these two women's email exchanges because that's his job as the IT guy. I saw the appeal to everything. I saw how it could have been possible for him to become so attracted and emotionally connected with this woman, but at the same time, I didn't, and I found it also unrealistic how she received everything, and basically, I had this trouble this month with understanding and feeling as if things were genuine. I don't know if this is me progressing and evolving as a reader or whether it's just a bunch of duds this month, but I really didn't like this. The next book was actually the last book I read in the entire year, and it's one of them that is behind me, and that was Tonight the Streets Are Ours by Layla Sales. I could see why people loved it. I just wasn't in that bandwagon. Firstly, I think it was because of my expectations, and I also just think that the story wasn't as strong. The characters seemed very elusive in her interests. The actual lesson the book set out to teach and did execute very well was the same as a lot of YA novels, but she did it in a way that was unique to herself. And it was basically just about not always relying on other people's constructs of love and expectations towards how life will end up in general. There was no particular thing that stands out to me, and I did read this pretty recently, that I could say was the great thing about Tonight the Streets Are Ours. And because you might want a synopsis, this follows a girl who basically has been reading this blog and is the only salvation for her throughout just not really knowing what direction she's going. It follows this teenage boy's life, very similar in age to her own. She sets out with her best friend to New York City one day and actually goes to meet him, and it ends up being probably one of his most defining nights, but most likely not one of hers, which ends up being a good thing, I might add. I put way too much honey in this tea, and it takes a lot for me to say that. We have now progressed on to the non-novel section of this wrap-up, and the first one being Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. Upon the release of the BFG trailer, I wanted to finish all the other Roald Dahl books that I haven't yet gotten to. I've read The Witches, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, George's Marvelous Medicine, Danny Champion of the World, and all these other novels that completely blew me away in terms of their message and the way that they weren't just for kids and the way they were written. But Fantastic Mr. Fox seemed very much so like a regular children's book, which is not something I often feel when I read a book by Roald Dahl. So I was disappointed. I'm not really sure what I can tell you as a synopsis besides the fact that there is a sneaky fox who gets penned in by these three farmers who he's been stealing from, and then he bands together with all these other creatures who benefit from also stealing from the farmer. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I'm pretty sure if you wanted to read it, I ruined the pitch for you. The novella I read this month was The Blue-Haired Boy by Courtney C. Stevens. After I read Faking Normal, I had to see Bodhi's story and this one day that basically defined him and dubbed him the Kool-Aid Kid. What I love is when an author can give us a very short story while still making us feel so attached to the characters and everything going on. And even though I saw Bodhi obviously in Faking Normal, he had progressed and matured so much by this time, he was still lost in his identity, and this girl that he met just set him on track. She was so vivacious. I loved the way that she affected him and what their one day did together. I was afraid at first that there would be more romance going on, and I'm like, he had told the main character Faking Normal that he hadn't fallen in love with anyone else before her, so that seemed very confusing until, this is kind of a spoiler, but we learned that she is a lesbian, which is another thing that adds to the layered qualities of this novella. On my quest to look up everything ever written by Roald Dahl, first of all, I had never known he had written an adult short story, but I enjoyed it so much. This is called The Bookseller, and I think it's only like 40 print pages, and I listened to the audiobook. It follows this bookstore owner and his secretary slash assistant, and the two of them have this scam going on where they look at the obituaries in the newspaper and they try to see the rich and stodgy people who have died, and then they send to their addresses these notices that they should pay the fee for the expensive books that they have purchased to the dead people's family, and of course they have no proof of anything, so the families pay up. What's really funny and revealed in the actual short story is that the books in the store itself have no worth to them whatsoever, and basically you can just pull it off the shelf and take it. There's no rare copies or editions, but people have the impression that there are, and that is how they get away with the scam. I loved seeing Roald Dahl and his perspective of adults, and to be honest, no matter how bad he makes out adult human beings in his children's books, they're even worse in his adult short stories. Then I listened to the Cumulative Audiobook for the 3 Roald Dahl books, which were The Twits, The Min Pins, and The Magic Finger. The Twits followed this old couple dubbed the Twits, who were just nasty and mean to everyone else and to each other. It was basically about their messed up relationship. The Min Pins was my favorite of all the short stories. It was about this small boy who discovered this little, I don't know if you want to call it village or community of these tiny creatures that are human-sized called the Min Pins, who traveled on birds and who ran things in society, and it was so cute seeing that, but it was also what I remember that I loved reading in Roald Dahl's novels, just about the lesson behind everything pertaining to not growing up and having belief in the seemingly impossible. And The Magic Finger followed a girl who, guess what, had a magic finger and was able to do peculiar things to people, and this particular short story followed one of the families that she did peculiar things to, as sort of a revenge plot. The last thing I read this month, I promise, was the speech We Shall Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope that's how you pronounce it. It most likely is not. When I read a speech, I expect to be inspired, I expect to be ignited. Obviously, it probably came off differently when she read it and delivered this speech. I still haven't looked at the YouTube video. Sometimes the impact of our words gets lost in translation through different mediums, for example, verbally or reading it as a piece of text. But I just didn't feel that inspired, and everything she said, yes, it was good about feminism, but it wasn't anything new that I haven't heard before, and I just didn't find it overwhelmingly good. And there we have it, the 17 pieces of text that I read the month of December. It was a good reading month for me, despite a lot of writing commitments, moving to Oxford, having a social life now, I don't know how that happened, and of course celebrating my birthday. Tell me in the comments below what was your most disappointing read of this month, because obviously I talked a lot about my expectations and how a lot of the books that I read weren't that satisfying to those expectations. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see you in a video very soon. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this video and like to see more like it, give it a big thumbs up in the comment below. If you liked it even more, hit the subscribe button. All my social media is at SLS Books, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, etc. And my previous videos are below me.